Bob Cusack back with Mark Penn. As we always do, Mark, what's one word that sums up your new polling data?
I think stability is the word because there's such stability in public opinion and so really little change, maybe 1 or 2 points here or there. But the public itself thinks the country's in the wrong track, the economy's in the wrong track. They don't like, President Biden. They give him a 43% rating that hasn't changed in months. And so very little is actually happening in public opinion. It seems to be almost setting in concrete or cement.
What? Why is Biden? Biden's certainly consistent. Your new poll has him as prior polls at 43% approval rating. The economy numbers, yes, they may have changed a little bit, but they're still not good. Most think we're either in a recession or we're heading into one down the road. Is this really troubling with now Biden having launched his presidential campaign, that he's stuck at a number that you've said, listen, unless he gets it higher, he's going to have a tough time for anybody at 43 is going to have a tough time in a election.
There's just no enthusiasm for Biden. Even among the Democratic Party, there's, when you ask Democrats, well, who would you vote for in a Democratic primary? About 40% pick Biden, and they don't really have somebody else that they want to choose. And so the fact that his job rating is 43, his personal rating is equally low. The conditions of the economy are seen as bad. The most enthusiastic people about him running seems to be him and the people in his White House. And look, some Democrats, really, there is alignment. There's no opposition to him. But these are very, very difficult ratings for someone to run, let alone someone whom most people think won't be able to serve a second term. And most people think that Kamala Harris will wind up president. You add that, you kind of layer that on top of the usual situation, and it makes for a pretty unusual re-election run.
Yeah, definitely. I know some people say, well, the vice president on the ticket doesn't matter, but when the president's 80 plus, then the vice president does matter. Her numbers are not very good. But pivoting to Trump after the CNN town hall, which went pretty well for Trump, not so great for CNN, he's up now 40 points on DeSantis. I believe that's basically a few points higher than last time. DeSantis continues to sink, but he's certainly well ahead of other Republicans in the race. What do you make of these numbers?
Well, Trump's numbers have strengthened. DeSantis has continued to weaken. I know I wrote that I thought DeSantis needed to kind of do a fundamental reset. He was having a near-death experience of his almost launched presidential campaign. Look, I think he's going to have to get out there, have a message. Let's see what it is, see whether or not he can pick up traction. No matter what the polls show, I wouldn't give it to Trump at the moment because Trump is a totally known commodity, and DeSantis really isn't known by the rest of the country or known by voters in Iowa or New Hampshire yet in any real way. So I think you got to let it play out. And 58%, including, I think, similar numbers in the GOP, thought that, well, once DeSantis gets in, he'll give Trump a bit of a challenge. But no question that he is facing a more uphill battle because, after all, the battle hasn't been Trump against DeSantis. The battle has been Trump against Alan Bragg or Trump against CNN. And whereas Trump normally loses to Trump, meaning he gets himself into some incredible trouble each time, in these cases, when he's fighting against a prosecutor in New York who seems to be acting politically, or a CNN moderator that asks him about, the 2020 election and then basically he gets criticized for talking about the election that they asked him about. I think that those are enemies that strengthen Trump because they strengthen Trump among the Republican core base. It'll be a very different dynamic, I think, with DeSantis and Tim Scott in.
Now, Trump is up 7. I believe that's on Biden, and I believe that's the largest differential there. And obviously, Trump, like DeSantis, they're catering to the Republican base right now. But that's where I'm kind of baffled by some Democrats who are rooting for Trump to win when you have Trump up 7 points on Biden. Why do you think he's picked up ground on the president?
Well, that's the shocker finding of this poll is that now we're up to 7 points. I
Yep.
think I was surprised when it was 2 or 3, surprised when it went to 5. Now it's gone to 7. Again, I go back to Biden's stuck at 40. A lot of the country doesn't want him to run for president. It looks like he's quite beatable by Trump now, if you look at these polls, and that their plan of let's get Trump in so that we could make everything about Trump again is not as easy to pull off when you have a record that most Americans reject. If the president was sitting there with decent approval ratings, it would be a different story. Of course, you'd want to be Johnson against Goldwater again. But that's not how this is shaping up right now. And it is to me the shocker finding. I didn't think that it would go back. I thought maybe the previous ones were a little bit of an outlier, but you really see that these fights and battles that Trump gets into have only strengthened him in the last couple of months, and his responses seem to be, look, when you, in one of the other polls, not in our poll, when you ask who's fit to be president, despite his relatively advanced age, everyone says, no, Biden may not be fit, but Trump is clearly fit to be president.
Yeah, and Trump is also up double digits, 11 points up on Kamala Harris. So, and DeSantis, it should be noted, is tied with Biden despite his slide. So, not good news for Biden. And pivoting off that, I want to go to the debt limit next. Kevin McCarthy actually has an approval rating above water, which is highly unusual for a congressional leader. As we know, Mitch McConnell, his numbers are way and have long been way underwater, but that's kind of normal. Pelosi was always underwater, but McCarthy's actually approval ratings are 34/33, so he's +1. This comes at a time when I think McCarthy has had a pretty good run since a tough start. Took him 15 rounds to become Speaker. He's put the White House on defense on the DC crime bill, and now he's got a lot of what he wants, at least in the initial stages. The Republican Party is united by him. They passed a bill that would raise the debt ceiling. He's been hammering Schumer, and he's been hammering Biden on just come to the table. Now the White House does seem like it has gotten off the mark of just, no, we're not going to negotiate. And they're not going to do a clean debt ceiling. That couldn't even pass the Senate right now. Certainly not going to pass the House. How do you think McCarthy's handled this as we speak? Biden is now abroad. Those were not good headlines or chyrons for the president to be, heading out of the country when we're facing a potential global economic crisis. How do you think he's done so far? Because these numbers are pretty good for a speaker.
Yeah, no, McCarthy has defied expectations here, and certainly defied, I think, the way he's sometimes painted in the media. The truth is, most leaders of these parties, whether it's Pelosi or Schumer or McConnell, have awful public ratings because they're seen as total partisans for their party. And so therefore everybody in the other party and most of the moderate voters kind of don't like them. And that's not happening with McCarthy as of yet. First, I think McCarthy battled his way to the speakership not by fighting the right? And they were seen as his opponents. And then he's kind of come out here and said, look, we need some spending caps. He got something done. He's held his coalition together. He's gotten Biden to maybe flex somewhat. And he's out there saying, look, we got to pass the debt ceiling, but we got to have spending restraints, a message that we know is quite popular with the public. So I don't know how it's going to come out, but as you say, he's got a promising start. So did Newt Gingrich have a promising start. And we'll see how he can maneuver the combination of his coalition here and kind of land the plane.
Next up, I talk about the Durham report, which is a pretty damning report, over 300 pages. John Durham, pretty well-respected independent prosecutor, basically came up with some findings that, well, it depends on who you ask what the findings were. Different editorial boards have weighed in, Wall Street Journal, and which is more conservative, the Washington Post, which is certainly more liberal than the Wall Street Journal, and had totally different takes on it. What are your findings here?
Well, the findings are that half the people haven't even heard of the report. And then of the people who've heard of the report, boy, even they're somewhat confused about the findings. And some of them don't know whether or not it's founded or unfounded in terms of whether the Trump-Russia investigation was. Look, I read all 306 pages because I've been very interested in general in the topic, because when I originally read the Steele dossier, I said, well, look, anybody can figure out that this is a fake put-up job. And so consequently, this report is incredibly detailed, going step by step, the source of basically each and every piece of information, every source. And it basically is I think anyway, if you read it, and its basic conclusions are that the FBI exceeded normal procedures and even the law, and that the problems came from the leadership, not the rules and regulations. And that they saw a clear pattern in which investigations on Trump were moved forward quickly and investigations on Democrats were stalled or deep sixed. But the coverage of this has been such as well, if you watch Fox News, and we haven't done the crosstabs yet, but I think it's going to be pretty clear that if you watch Fox News, you think that the investigations on Trump were unfounded, and we still have a situation where, despite this report, despite the Mueller report, despite everything that's happened, a healthy majority of Democrats think that Trump is a Russian asset and was helped and basically colluded with the Russians to win the presidency. And so I don't understand, we can spend another $40 million on reports. It doesn't seem, we've really found that this came from from Clinton Oppo research, that the sources had no real information and fell apart once they were questioned, and that there was no real independent evidence for this at all. And consequently, it's really stunning to me to see so many people bought into this, and media that won Pulitzer Prizes continue to defend their coverage when any careful reading of this report shows how he spent years getting to the bottom of this. Mm-hmm. And he does so in a very non-inflammatory way. He wasn't trying to, put everyone in jail. He says basically for every wrong, there isn't really a right. Every judgment or action by a public official doesn't result in criminal prosecution, but he's very clear about what happened.
Mm-hmm. A couple other issues. Immigration has been ticking up as a top issue. I believe it's up 3 points in your poll. But the economy and inflation certainly still number one. And now Title 42 has ended. Do you think this is now, the surge hasn't been what many expected, but of course the border is the border, and the border is going to be there in a month or 2 months, and sometimes over the summer we've seen big numbers at the border. What's your take, and also the political vulnerability of the White House on immigration?
Well, the president receives ratings in the high 30s on immigration. It's one of his weaknesses, along with inflation. And so consequently, I think the White House does now see this as a weakness. They have taken a couple of steps. They did move some troops. They looked a little bit more like they stood for a more balanced policy. I think in the internals of this poll, they go that people really overall reject Biden's immigration policy, but they were a couple of points more believing that he's just trying to put in a fairer immigration system. But it's a loser issue for him. I don't know that it's going to have more impact than it has. That is to say that I think the voters have sorted themselves out, on the issue, and I just don't think it does any more or less damage to him than him being at 40 compared to Trump's 47. I think to the extent that he wants to win some voters back, he's going to have to take, a stronger view on the border.
Also want to touch upon race. You have some new numbers there. The president's made some remarks on race recently, specifically white supremacy. And certainly we've seen different polling numbers over the last several years after the killing of George Floyd. Black Lives Matter soared in popularity. They have fallen back. What was your take on the race data?
Well, most people do see that there's systematic racism in their belief in the system of justice and policing, but they don't see the answer to that as being racial preferences or greater leniency on people from different races. I think the public is very strong that they want to move to a colorblind society, that the answer to racism isn't more racism in any fashion or even preferences to make up for racism. It's moving to colorblind, criminal justice system, colorblind college admissions, colorblind medical admissions, colorblind hiring. I mean, I have 70, 80% numbers here in the directions for the support for that. And I would be surprised if the Supreme Court didn't affirm that as a notion, which will create a lot of hullabaloo, certainly for people who believe differently. But this is where the public is, and this is where you've seen referendums even in California go down. The American public does not want to institutionalize racial preferences as a way to right wrongs.
Senator Tim Scott is all but in the race. He's filed his papers, and he's officially going to launch very soon. Do you think he can shake up that race?
I think there's a good chance he can. I mean, we don't know where South Carolina is going to be in that race. He could do well there. He could do well in Iowa. I don't know about New Hampshire. But remember, he's really a very strong candidate. He's going to have a message more of kind of optimism and unity. He's not as well known in the country, so he has a chance really to craft an image that could be quite positive. So I think he has a lot of underlying strength as a candidate. I think that he is certainly more of a possibility than the numbers would indicate. Of course, by any numbers, he's not that well known. He polls 1 or 2% in a Republican primary. But yes, I think he potentially could shake things up, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if we wound up, after some rounds here with him, DeSantis, and Trump on the stage.
A lot going on right now, Mark. We've got the debt ceiling showdown. We got 2024 race heating up, immigration controversies. Any closing remarks? Anything I didn't hit upon that you wanted to highlight?
No, I just come back to me, the main finding here is month after month, this is a highly divided country in which public opinion isn't moving much. We've seen a little bit move here that Trump strengthened himself and Biden's announcement failed to generate any strength. And so I'm kind of surprised, but the underlying numbers that show a 50-50 divided country in which Democrats see things one way and Republicans see things the other, that kind of is really getting locked in. And we don't have the kind of candidate right now that is going to shake up politics and reach across aisles. And so it's indicating whatever happens in the next election, unless we get such a candidate, is going to be an election decided by 50,000 votes in the electoral college tabulation somewhere, unless we have some different candidates. And I think over 65% in this poll said that they'd rather have a match different from Trump versus Biden, an overwhelming number.
That has been a consistent number we've seen, and probably will be consistent, because the next time we talk, it'll hopefully be after the debt ceiling fight is over. So we'll see who wins that showdown. Mark, thanks so much.
Thank you.